The crystal chandeliers sparkled like 1,000 tiny stars above the dining room. Soft classical music played through hidden speakers, mixing with the gentle clinking of expensive silverware against fine china. This was the Riverside Grand, the kind of place where a single dinner could cost more than what some people earned in a week. Tonight was special. It was Robert and Diana's 25th wedding anniversary, and they wanted everything to be perfect. Robert had been planning this evening for months. He'd called the restaurant 6 times to confirm the reservation, triple-checked the menu, and even visited twice to make sure their table had the best view in the house. They sat near the center of the elegant dining room, surrounded by 12 of their closest friends. The women wore designer dresses that shimmered under the warm lighting. The men had on tailored suits that probably cost more than a used car. Everyone laughed at the right moments, complimented the food with practiced grace, and sipped wine from bottles that had names no one could quite pronounce. Robert kept checking his gold watch. Not because he was bored, but because he had a surprise planned. A big one. The kind that would make this night unforgettable. He'd already paid a small fortune to make it happen, and everything needed to go exactly as scheduled. Diana smiled and chatted with their friends, but something seemed off. She laughed when everyone else laughed, nodded at all the right moments, but her mind seemed to be somewhere else. Every few minutes, her eyes would drift away from the conversation and settle on something across the room. In the far corner of the restaurant sat a beautiful grand piano. It was a gorgeous instrument, all polished black wood and pristine ivory keys. The piano was positioned perfectly, like a piece of expensive art on display. But that's all it was, really. Just decoration. In all the times Diana had visited this restaurant over the years, she'd never once heard anyone play it. It just sat there silent and beautiful, like a voice that had forgotten how to sing. Diana had loved piano music since she was a little girl. Her grandmother used to play for her every Sunday afternoon. Those memories were some of the happiest from her childhood. The way the music filled the room, the way it made her feel like she was floating, the way certain melodies could make her laugh or cry without any words at all. She'd always dreamed of learning to play herself, but life got busy. College, then work, then marriage, and building a life with Robert. The dream of playing piano had gotten buried under years of other responsibilities. Still, she loved to listen. At home, she had a collection of classical piano recordings that she played while reading or cooking. Music had a way of making ordinary moments feel special. That's why she kept looking at that silent piano. It felt like such a waste to have something so beautiful just sitting there, unused. The restaurant buzzed with quiet conversations. At the table next to theirs, a group of businessmen discussed deals over steaks that cost $80 each. 2 tables over, a young couple celebrated something, probably an engagement, judging by the way the woman kept looking at her hand and smiling. Near the window, an older gentleman dined alone, reading a newspaper between bites of his meal. Moving between all these tables was a young woman named Jenny. She wore the standard uniform of the Riverside Grand's serving staff, a crisp white shirt, black vest, and black pants. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she moved with the efficiency of someone who'd done this job for a long time. Jenny carried heavy trays without seeming to strain, remembered complicated orders without writing anything down, and managed to smile genuinely at every table even though her feet ached and her back hurt from hours of standing. She'd been working at the Riverside Grand for 3 years now. It wasn't her dream job, but it paid the bills. Barely. What none of these wealthy diners knew, what they couldn't have known just by looking at her, was that Jenny had a secret. Well, maybe secret wasn't the right word. A past, perhaps. A different life that felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. She refilled water glasses at a table near the piano, and as she did, her eyes lingered on the instrument for just a moment. Her fingers twitched slightly, muscle memory from years ago trying to surface. She caught herself and quickly moved to the next table. No point in thinking about all that. That was the old Jenny. That was before everything fell apart. Back at the anniversary table, the main course had just been served. Robert stood up, tapping his wine glass with a spoon to get everyone's attention. The nearby tables glanced over, curious about the small celebration happening. Everyone. "If I could have your attention for just a moment," Robert said, his voice carrying across their section of the restaurant. He had that confident tone of someone used to speaking at important meetings, someone who expected to be listened to. His friends quieted down, turning to face him with expectant smiles. Diana looked up at her husband, surprised. This wasn't part of the plan she knew about. 25 years ago, Robert began, I married the most incredible woman I've ever met. Diana has been my partner, my best friend, and the person who makes everything in life worth doing. She's put up with my long hours at the office, my terrible jokes, and my habit of leaving socks on the bedroom floor. Everyone chuckled. Diana blushed slightly, reaching up to take Robert's free hand. Honey, I know I don't always show it the way I should, Robert continued, his voice softening. But you mean everything to me. And tonight I wanted to do something special, something that would tell you and everyone here just how much you mean to me. He turned and gestured toward the silent piano in the corner with a dramatic flourish. Several guests followed his gesture, curiosity building. That piano over there has been sitting silent for far too long, Robert said, a smile spreading across his face. So I've arranged for someone very special to play for us tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, and especially for my beautiful wife, I'm pleased to announce that we'll be entertained by André Belcourt, principal pianist from the City Symphony Orchestra, who will be playing Diana's favorite classical pieces right here, right now. The table erupted in delighted applause. Several of their friends gasped in genuine surprise. André Belcourt was famous in the classical music world. Getting him to perform at a private dinner was nearly impossible. Robert must have called in significant favors and spent a considerable amount of money to make this happen. Diana's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and joy. This was exactly the kind of thoughtful gesture that reminded her why she'd fallen in love with Robert all those years ago. He remembered. He knew how much music meant to her, and he'd done this. But as the applause died down and everyone turned expectantly toward the entrance where the famous pianist should be appearing, Robert's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen. His smile faltered slightly. It was a message from the restaurant's manager. Robert's face went from confident to confused to worried in the span of about 3 seconds. Diana noticed immediately. What's wrong? She asked quietly, though several of their friends had also picked up on the change in his expression. Robert cleared his throat and excused himself from the table, walking quickly toward the front of the restaurant where he could see the manager, waiting with an apologetic expression that didn't promise good news. At a nearby table, Jenny was clearing plates when she noticed the small drama unfolding. She'd been doing this job long enough to recognize when something went wrong at an important celebration, and from the look on that man's face as he rushed toward the manager, something had definitely gone wrong. Robert stood near the restaurant entrance, his phone pressed against his ear, speaking in the urgent but controlled tone of someone trying not to make a scene. The manager, an older gentleman named Vincent who'd worked at the Riverside Grand for nearly 20 years, stood beside him with his hands clasped apologetically in front of him. Jenny moved between tables, but she couldn't help noticing the conversation. The manager's voice was low, but every server in the restaurant had learned to read body language. Something had gone very wrong. Back at the anniversary table, Diana tried to keep smiling as her friends asked what was happening. She didn't know, but that look on Robert's face worried her. He'd worked so hard to plan this perfect evening. Please, she thought. Please don't let something ruin it. After what felt like forever, Robert returned to the table. He was smiling, but it was the kind of smile people wear when they're trying to hide disappointment. Diana knew that smile well. She'd seen it when his firm lost a big client, or when the weather ruined their vacation plans. So, one of their friends asked cheerfully, "When does the concert start?" Robert cleared his throat and sat down, reaching for his wine glass. He took a sip before answering, buying himself a few seconds to figure out what to say. "There's been a small change of plans," he said, his voice steady but lacking its earlier enthusiasm. "André Belcourt was in a car accident this afternoon," Diana gasped. Several others at the table made concerned sounds. "He's fine," Robert added quickly, waving his hand. "Nothing serious. But his doctor won't let him perform tonight. Something about his wrist needing rest." The table fell into an uncomfortable silence. Their friends exchanged glances, not quite sure what to say. Was it okay to be disappointed when the pianist was injured? Should they pretend it didn't matter? "Oh, Robert," Diana said softly, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "It's all right. You tried to do something wonderful. That's what matters," but her eyes betrayed her. She glanced once more at that silent piano. and Robert saw the disappointment she was trying so hard to hide. He'd wanted to give her this. He'd paid $3,000 to get Andre Belcourt to come here. He'd imagined her face lighting up as beautiful music filled the restaurant. This was supposed to be perfect. "I'm so sorry, darling," he said quietly. "I really wanted this for you." "I know," Diana said, forcing brightness into her voice. "And I love you for it, really. We don't need a famous pianist to have a wonderful anniversary. We have our friends, this beautiful dinner, and each other. That's more than enough." She meant it, she did. But she couldn't stop that small ache of disappointment that settled in her chest. Not disappointment in Robert, but in the moment itself. She'd been so looking forward to hearing that piano come to life. Their friends, sensing the mood shift, tried to liven things up. Someone proposed a toast. Another person shared a funny story. The conversation slowly rebuilt itself, but it felt forced now, like everyone was working a little too hard to pretend everything was fine. Jenny had been refilling bread baskets at a nearby table when she heard the news about the pianist. She felt a pang of sympathy for the couple, especially the wife. The woman had looked so happy when her husband announced the surprise, and now she was trying so hard to smile while clearly being disappointed. As Jenny approached their table to refill water glasses, she overheard more of the conversation. "I even got the list of your favorite pieces," Robert was saying to Diana. "Moonlight Sonata, Nocturne in E-flat, Clair de Lune. I had it all planned out." Diana's eyes got a little misty. "You remembered all of those?" "Of course I remembered. You play those recordings all the time at home?" Jenny's hand trembled slightly as she poured water into Diana's glass. Those pieces. She knew every single one of them. She'd performed them dozens of times. Moonlight Sonata had been her signature piece at her final recital at Juilliard. Clair de Lune was what she'd played at her audition. She could still feel the keys under her fingers, still hear the notes in her head. "Stop it," she told herself. "That life is over. You made your choice." But as she moved away from the table, she found herself looking at the piano again. It had been 3 years since she'd played on a real grand piano. 3 years since she'd performed for anyone but herself, in her tiny apartment on a cheap electric keyboard, with half the keys sticking. 3 years since her father's diagnosis had changed. Everything. She'd been 25 then, about to graduate from one of the world's most prestigious music schools. She'd had auditions lined up with 3 major orchestras. Her professors said she had the talent to be truly great. Not just good, but great. Everything she'd worked for since she was 7 years old was finally coming together. Then came the phone call. Dad had collapsed at work. The diagnosis was serious. Very serious. And the treatment would be expensive. Her younger brother was still in high school. Her sister was only 14. Her mother worked as a nurse, but it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. The choice hadn't really been a choice at all. Family came first. It always had in her family. So she'd left school 3 months before graduation, moved back home and started working, first at a diner, then at the Riverside Grand where the tips were better. Every spare dollar went to medical bills and keeping her siblings fed and clothed. Her father was better now, thank God. Still weak, still needing medication, but stable. Her brother had graduated and was working construction. Her sister was doing well in school. They'd made it through the worst of it, but Jenny's dreams had been the price. Juilliard didn't hold your spot for 3 years. The orchestras didn't keep audition slots open. The music world moved on without you if you weren't there to grab opportunities when they came. She told herself it was okay. She'd made peace with it. Some dreams didn't come true, and that was just life. She'd had her chance, and family had mattered more. She'd make that same choice again if she had to. But standing there in that elegant restaurant, looking at that beautiful piano that no one ever played, listening to this kind couple whose special night had been ruined, something stirred inside her. Something she'd been trying to keep quiet for 3 long years. Her manager, Vincent, walked past carrying menus. Jenny reached out and gently touched his arm. "Vincent," she said quietly, "I need to ask you something. It's probably crazy, but I need to ask anyway." He turned, looking at her with surprise. Jenny was one of his best servers precisely because she never caused problems or made unusual requests. She did her job, did it well, and went home. "What is it?" he asked. Jenny took a deep breath. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. This could go terribly wrong. She could lose her job for overstepping. But something in her refused to let this moment pass. "That couple at table 7, she said. "Their anniversary." The pianist who was supposed to play. I know this sounds strange, but I could play for them. I'm trained. I was trained. At Juilliard? Vincent stared at her like she'd just announced she was secretly a princess or something equally unbelievable. You play piano? He asked, his eyebrows rising toward his hairline. I used to perform. Professionally. Well, almost professionally. Before I had to leave school. The words tumbled out faster now. I know all those pieces they mentioned. I could play them right now if you let me. I can't watch that woman be sad about something I could fix. Does that make sense? Vincent looked uncertain. This was highly irregular. Servers didn't just volunteer to perform in the middle of their shifts. What would the other guests think? What would management say? But then he looked over at table 7, at Diana's forced smile and Robert's disappointed expression, and something in him softened. Are you absolutely certain you can do this? He asked. Jenny's hands were shaking, but she nodded. Yes, then go ask them. But Jenny, if this goes badly, I can't protect you. You understand that? I understand. Jenny removed her order pad from her vest pocket and set it on the server station. She smoothed down her uniform and walked toward table 7, her legs feeling like they might give out at any moment. This was either the bravest or the stupidest thing she'd ever done. She was about to find out which. Jenny's legs felt like they were moving through water as she approached table 7. Every step seemed to take forever. Her heart hammered in her chest so loudly she was sure everyone in the restaurant could hear it. What was she doing? This was insane. These were wealthy people celebrating something important. Who was she to interrupt their evening? But her feet kept moving forward anyway. When she reached the table, the conversation stopped. 12 pairs of eyes turned to look at her. Diana glanced up with a polite smile, probably expecting Jenny to ask if they needed anything. Robert looked mildly annoyed at the interruption. Excuse me, Jenny said, her voice coming out quieter than she'd intended. She cleared her throat and tried again. I'm so sorry to interrupt your celebration. I know this is going to sound strange, but I couldn't help overhearing about the pianist who couldn't make it tonight. Robert's expression shifted from annoyed to confused. One of the women at the table, wearing a diamond necklace that probably cost more than Jenny's car, raised an eyebrow. I could play for you, Jenny continued, the words rushing out now before her courage completely failed her. The piano, I mean. I know the pieces you mentioned. All of them. I studied at Juilliard before I had to leave. I just thought maybe, if you wanted, I could play instead. The silence that followed felt like it lasted an hour. It probably only lasted 3 seconds, but to Jenny it felt eternal. She watched as confusion spread across the faces around the table. Some of them looked amused, like this was some kind of joke. Others looked uncomfortable, like she'd done something inappropriate. One of the men, sitting 2 seats down from Robert, actually laughed. Not meanly, but the kind of laugh that said he thought this was absurd. The waitress plays piano? He said to the person next to him, just loud enough for everyone to hear. Jenny's face burned hot. This was a mistake. A terrible mistake. She should have kept her mouth shut and done her job. Now she'd embarrassed herself and probably upset these people on their special night. She was about to apologize and walk away when Diana spoke. You went to Juilliard? Diana asked, her voice gentle but genuinely curious. Jenny nodded, not trusting herself to speak without her voice shaking. And you know Moonlight Sonata? Clair de Lune? Yes, ma'am. I performed them both. Many times. Diana studied Jenny's face carefully, looking for something. Jenny didn't know what. Signs of lying, maybe? Signs that this was some weird prank? But whatever Diana saw seemed to satisfy her because her expression softened. Before Diana could respond, Vincent appeared at Jenny's elbow. His face had gone pale, and Jenny knew he was probably regretting giving her permission to do this. I'm terribly sorry for the interruption, Vincent said smoothly, his professional manner firmly in place. Jenny, perhaps we should let our guests enjoy their dinner. Wait, Diana said, holding up her hand. She looked at Robert, then back at Jenny. What's your full name? Jenny Park. Well, Jenny Park, I think I'd very much like to hear you play. Robert leaned toward his wife.
Diana, honey, are you sure? We don't even know if she can really play.
Maybe she's confused or... Robert, look at her hands, Diana said quietly. Everyone at the table looked at Jenny's hands. She'd been twisting them nervously in front of her, but now she held them still. Her fingers were long and elegant, the nails cut short and practical. There were calluses on her fingertips, the kind that came from hours of practice on piano keys. Diana had played piano briefly as a young girl, just enough to recognize those calluses. Her grandmother had them too. They were the marks of someone who'd spent thousands of hours at a piano. "Those are a pianist's hands," Diana said. Then she looked directly at Jenny. "Aren't they?" Jenny nodded, tears suddenly threatening to spill over. Someone had seen her. Really seen her. Not just a waitress. Not just staff. Someone who understood. "Then I'd be honored if you'd play for us," Diana said firmly. Robert opened his mouth to object again, but Diana gave him a look that said this wasn't up for debate. After 25 years of marriage, he knew that look well. He sighed and nodded. "All right then," he said, though he still sounded uncertain. Vincent looked like he wanted to protest too, but what could he say? The guests wanted it. He gave Jenny a small nod that said, "This is your show now, don't make me regret this." Jenny felt like she might faint, or throw up, or both. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together to keep everyone from seeing. "Thank you," she whispered to Diana. "Thank you so much." She turned and walked toward the piano before she could change her mind. As she crossed the dining room, she became aware of other diners watching. Word had spread quickly through the restaurant. The waitress was going to play the piano? People were whispering, curious, skeptical, amused. A few looked annoyed that their quiet dinner was being interrupted. Jenny reached the piano and stood in front of it for a moment. The bench sat there waiting. The keys gleamed under the soft lights. This was a beautiful instrument, probably worth more than she'd make in 5 years of serving tables. She reached out and gently touched the fallboard, the smooth wood cool under her fingers. She looked back at Diana, who smiled encouragingly. Then she looked at all the other faces watching her. Some friendly, some not. Some curious, some already judging her. Her manager stood near the kitchen door, his arms crossed, looking worried. The other servers had stopped what they were doing to watch. The kitchen staff were peeking through the service window. Even the chef had come out to see what was happening. Jenny sat down on the bench. The leather was smooth and comfortable. She adjusted her position, getting the distance from the keys just right. Her feet found the pedals naturally, muscle memory from years of practice kicking in. She lifted the fallboard, revealing all 88 keys, black and white, perfectly aligned, waiting. How long had it been since she'd sat in front of a real grand piano? 3 years. 3 long years of cheap keyboards and silent dreams. Her hands hovered over the keys, trembling. What if she'd lost it? What if 3 years of not practicing on a real piano had destroyed her ability? What if she sat down and her fingers forgot everything they'd once known? She'd embarrass herself in front of all these people. She'd lose her job. Diana would regret believing in her. The restaurant had gone completely quiet now. Even the background music had been turned off. Everyone was waiting, watching. The pressure felt crushing. Jenny closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then another. She thought about her grandmother back home, who used to sing old Korean folk songs while cooking. She thought about her father, fighting through his illness with quiet dignity. She thought about her brother and sister counting on her. She thought about all those nights practicing in her apartment on her broken keyboard, refusing to let the dream die completely. And she thought about 7-year-old Jenny sitting at her first piano lesson, placing her small hands on the keys for the very first time and feeling like she'd come home. She opened her eyes. Her fingers settled onto the keys, finding their positions as naturally as breathing. The opening notes of Moonlight Sonata lived in her bones. She'd played this piece hundreds of times. She could play it in her sleep. But would her hands remember? Would the piano respond? Would any of this work? There was only one way to find out. Jenny took one more breath and then she began to play. The first note rang out clear and pure through the silent restaurant. Then the second. Then the third. The familiar melody of Beethoven's masterpiece started to unfold. Tentative at first, like someone remembering how to walk after a long illness. But then something remarkable happened. Her fingers remembered. The muscle memory flooded back. The years of training, the countless hours of practice, the deep love of music that she'd buried but never killed, all of it came rushing back through her hands into the keys, and the piano, silent for so long, finally began to sing. The music started softly, almost whisper quiet, like Jenny was afraid to disturb the silence. The opening notes of Moonlight Sonata drifted through the restaurant, delicate and careful. At first, it sounded exactly like what it was. Someone who hadn't performed in years, testing whether they still remembered how. But within seconds, something shifted. Jenny's fingers found their confidence. The notes grew stronger, more certain. The melody began to flow the way water flows downhill, naturally and inevitably. Her right hand carried the haunting tune while her left hand provided the gentle, rolling accompaniment that gave the piece its dreamlike quality. The businessman who'd been reading his newspaper looked up, forgetting entirely about the article he'd been in the middle of. The engaged couple by the window stopped their conversation mid-sentence. The group of men discussing their deals let their words trail off into nothing. At table 7, Diana's hand slowly moved to cover her mouth. Tears were already forming in her eyes, and the piece had barely begun. This wasn't just good playing. This was something else entirely. Jenny's whole body had changed. The nervous, apologetic waitress who'd stood there shaking moments ago had disappeared. In her place sat someone completely transformed. Her back was straight but relaxed. Her shoulders moved fluidly with the music. Her eyes were closed and her face held an expression of pure peace, like she'd finally found something she'd been searching for. The music filled every corner of the restaurant. It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. The piece was meant to be intimate, contemplative, like moonlight itself. And somehow, Jenny made each note sound exactly right, hitting not just the correct keys but the correct emotion behind each phrase. Robert had been skeptical. He'd been annoyed at the interruption, doubtful this waitress could really play, worried about his carefully planned evening being ruined by some awkward disaster. But now he sat perfectly still, listening. He reached across the table and found Diana's hand, squeezing it gently. She squeezed back without looking away from Jenny. In the kitchen, Carlos, the head chef, stood motionless with a plate in his hands. He'd been about to send it out, but now he just stood there listening. The sous chef beside him had tears running down his face, though he'd probably deny it later if anyone asked. Vincent, the manager, felt his throat tighten. In 20 years of working at the Riverside Grand, he'd never heard that piano played. Not once. It had been bought by the original owner's wife, who'd loved piano music but passed away before ever hearing it played in the restaurant. It had sat silent ever since, a beautiful memory of something that never was, until tonight. Jenny transitioned seamlessly into the second movement, her fingers dancing across the keys with increasing confidence. This section was more complex, requiring both hands to move independently in intricate patterns. It was the kind of playing that took years to master, thousands of hours of practice to make look effortless. And Jenny made it look effortless. The young engaged couple near the window were holding each other now. The woman rested her head on her partner's shoulder as they swayed slightly to the music. This would become part of their engagement story, something they'd tell people about for years. Remember that restaurant where the waitress played piano? Remember how beautiful it was? A woman dining alone at a corner table put down her fork and just listened. She'd come to the restaurant because she was lonely, because eating at home by herself was too sad. But right now she didn't feel lonely at all. The music seemed to wrap around her like a warm blanket, like someone understanding exactly how she felt without her having to say a word. As the final notes of Moonlight Sonata faded away, the restaurant remained silent. Jenny kept her hands on the keys for a moment, letting the last echoes die away naturally. Then she lifted her fingers and opened her eyes. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Diana started clapping. It wasn't the polite, restrained applause you'd expect in a fancy restaurant. It was enthusiastic, full of genuine emotion. Robert joined her immediately, clapping hard, no longer caring what anyone thought. And then everyone else joined in. The entire restaurant erupted in applause. People stood up from their tables. The kitchen staff burst through the doors, clapping and cheering. The businessman with the newspaper was on his feet. The lonely woman in the corner was clapping with tears streaming down her face. Even the couple who'd looked annoyed earlier were applauding. Jenny sat at the piano, stunned. She'd forgotten what this felt like. The performance, yes, but also this. Being seen, being appreciated, being recognized for the thing she was meant to do. She'd forgotten how it filled something deep inside her that serving tables never could. But she wasn't done yet. She turned on the bench to face the room and gave a small bow of her head. Then she turned back to the piano, her hands finding the keys again, "This next piece is called Clair de Lune," she said, her voice soft but carrying through the quiet room. "It means moonlight in French. It's about beauty and peace and how sometimes the most beautiful things in life are also the most fragile." She began to play, and if anything, this piece was even more beautiful than the first. Debussy's masterpiece flowed from her fingers like liquid silver. The melody rose and fell like gentle waves, each phrase building on the last, creating something that felt both sad and hopeful at the same time. Diana was openly crying now, not even trying to hide it. Several of her friends were dabbing at their eyes with their napkins. This was supposed to be a celebration, but somehow this felt more meaningful than any party. This felt real. Jenny poured everything into the music. 3 years of sacrifice, 3 years of putting her dreams aside, 3 years of wondering if she'd made the right choice, if giving up music had been worth it, if she'd lost herself somewhere along the way. But she hadn't lost herself. She'd been here all along, just waiting for the right moment to remember who she was. The music grew more complex, Jenny's hands crossing over each other in the intricate middle section. Her foot worked the sustain pedal with perfect timing, letting notes blend together in that signature impressionistic style that made Debussy's music so distinctive. In that moment, Jenny wasn't thinking about medical bills or her father's medication or whether she'd have enough money for rent. She wasn't thinking about the hole in her shoe or the broken heater in her apartment, or the fact that she'd eaten ramen for dinner 4 nights in a row. She was just playing, just being exactly who she was always meant to be. The piece built to its emotional climax, the melody soaring upward like a bird taking flight. Then it began its descent, growing softer and more delicate, like the moon slowly setting at dawn. The final notes were barely audible, just the gentlest touches on the keys until the very last note faded into silence. This time the applause was even louder. People were shouting, "Bravo!" Several people were openly weeping. The owner of the restaurant, who'd been in his office upstairs, came rushing down to see what was happening. When Vincent explained, the owner's eyes went wide with amazement. But Jenny barely heard any of it. She was lost in the moment, in the feeling of having played again, really played for the first time in 3 years. Her hands were shaking, but not from nerves anymore. From joy, from relief, from the overwhelming emotion of remembering who she really was. She stood from the piano bench, her legs unsteady. The applause continued, washing over her in waves. She looked at Diana, who was standing now, clapping so hard her hands must have hurt. And then Diana did something unexpected. She walked across the restaurant, right up to the piano, and wrapped Jenny in a tight hug. "Thank you," Diana whispered in her ear. "Thank you for the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me." Jenny hugged her back, tears finally spilling down her own cheeks. "Thank you for believing I could do it." When they pulled apart, Diana kept holding Jenny's hands, looking at them closely, at those calluses and the years of practice they represented. "Why are you serving tables?" Diana asked quietly, so only Jenny could hear. "Why aren't you on a stage somewhere?" And just like that, the wall Jenny had built around that part of her life crumbled. The story came pouring out. Jenny stood there holding Diana's hands, and suddenly the words she'd kept buried for 3 years came tumbling out. She told Diana about her father's illness, about the phone call that changed everything, about leaving Juilliard 3 months before graduation, about the medical bills that never seemed to end, about her younger brother and sister who needed food and clothes and someone to take care of them. "I had auditions lined up," Jenny said, her voice breaking. 3 different orchestras wanted to hear me play. My professors said I had real potential, but none of that mattered when my dad collapsed. Family comes first. It always has in our family. So I came home and I got a job and I did what needed to be done. Diana listened with tears streaming down her face. She squeezed Jenny's hands tighter. "And your father now? Is he all right?" "He's better," Jenny said, managing a small smile. "Still needs medication, still can't work, but he's stable. My brother graduated last year and has a good job. My sister's doing great in school. We made it through the worst part. But by then, 3 years had passed. Juilliard didn't hold my spot. The orchestras moved on. The music world doesn't wait for you when you're not there." By now, other people had gathered around. Robert stood beside his wife, listening. Several of their friends had come closer. The restaurant owner, Vincent, the other servers. Even some of the other diners had left their tables to hear Jenny's story. "That's not right," said one of the women from the anniversary table, the one with the expensive diamond necklace. That kind of talent shouldn't be wasted serving tables. No offense, she added quickly. None taken, Jenny said with a sad laugh. But that's just how life works sometimes. Not everyone gets to live their dream. But you should, Diana said firmly. She turned to look at her husband. Robert, your firm has that arts foundation, doesn't it? The one that gives scholarships to young musicians? Robert was quiet for a moment, thinking. He'd spent the evening frustrated that his surprise had been ruined, annoyed that some waitress had interrupted their celebration. But listening to Jenny play, hearing her story, seeing the pure talent and dedication in front of him, something had shifted in his perspective. We do have a foundation, he said slowly. We give grants to help promising artists continue their education and cover living expenses while they pursue their careers. Jenny's eyes went wide. I couldn't possibly accept something like that. I just wanted to play tonight. I didn't tell you my story to ask for anything. We know that, Diana said gently. That's exactly why you deserve help. The businessman who'd been reading the newspaper earlier stepped forward. He pulled out his wallet and handed Jenny a business card. I'm the conductor of the City Chamber Orchestra, he said. We're holding auditions next month. I'd like you to come play for us. Jenny stared at the card like it might disappear if she blinked. The City Chamber Orchestra was one of the groups she'd been supposed to audition for 3 years ago. The woman who'd been dining alone approached next. I run a music school downtown, she said. We need a piano instructor. It doesn't pay as much as performing, but it's better than waiting tables, and you could practice on our pianos anytime you wanted. The job's yours if you want it. More people started speaking up. A man offered to connect her with his wife, who managed a concert hall. Someone else mentioned a competition for young pianists. Another person offered to donate money to help with her father's medical bills. Jenny couldn't breathe. This was too much. It was like the universe had been waiting 3 years to give her back everything she'd lost all at once, in one impossible evening. I don't understand, she whispered. Why are you all doing this? You don't even know me. Diana pulled her into another hug. Because you reminded us of something important tonight. You reminded us that real luxury isn't about expensive wine or fancy restaurants or famous performers. It's about moments of genuine beauty. It's about recognizing something special when we see it and helping it grow instead of letting it disappear. She pulled back and looked Jenny in the eyes. You gave up your dreams for your family. That took courage. But now your family is stable and you deserve a chance to dream again. Let us help you, please. Jenny was full-on sobbing now, not even trying to hide it. The other servers were crying too. Carlos the chef was wiping his eyes with his apron. Even Vincent, who'd worked in fancy restaurants his entire adult life and thought he'd seen everything, had to turn away to compose himself. Robert pulled out his phone. I'm calling our foundation director right now. We'll set up a meeting this week. I can't promise anything definite, but I think we can work something out. The restaurant owner stepped forward too. Jenny, you've been a wonderful employee, but I think we both know you're meant for bigger things than working here, however long you need to transition to your music career. You've got a job here, and if you ever want to come play that piano again, just say the word. It's been silent too long. Jenny looked around at all these people, most of whom had been complete strangers an hour ago. They were looking at her with kindness, with encouragement, with the kind of support she'd forgotten existed in the world. She'd spent 3 years feeling invisible, feeling like she'd given up the most important part of herself. But tonight someone had really seen her, and in being seen everything had changed. I don't know what to say. She managed to get out between sobs. Thank you doesn't seem like enough. Then don't say anything, Diana said, smiling through her own tears. Just promise me something. Promise me you'll go to that audition. Promise me you'll accept the help. Promise me you won't let fear or pride or guilt stop you from becoming who you're meant to be. Jenny nodded, unable to speak. The evening continued, but it was nothing like the formal, elegant affair it had been before. People were talking across tables, sharing stories, laughing and crying together. The invisible walls that usually existed in fancy restaurants had dissolved. Everyone felt connected to something larger than themselves. Jenny played 2 more pieces that night, not because anyone asked her to, but because she wanted to. Because the piano was singing again after years of silence, and she couldn't bear to let it stop. When the restaurant finally closed at midnight, Jenny stood outside in the cool night air, her server's uniform in a bag, her feet aching from hours of standing, but her heart fuller than it had been in 3 years. She had business cards in her pocket, phone numbers written on napkins, promises of help and opportunity that she still couldn't quite believe were real. She pulled out her phone and called her father. "Dad?" she said when he answered, his voice groggy from sleep. "Sorry for calling so late, but I need to tell you something. Something amazing happened tonight." As she told him the story, standing under the streetlights outside the Riverside Grand, she could hear the emotion in his voice. "I'm so proud of you," he said. "I've always been proud of you. But Jenny, I need you to know something. I never wanted you to give up music for me. I never wanted that sacrifice." "I know, Dad," she said softly. "But I don't regret it. Not for a second. Family comes first. You taught me that, but maybe, just maybe, I can have both now. Maybe I can take care of family and still follow my dreams." "I think you can," he said. "I think tonight proved you can do anything you set your mind to." After they hung up, Jenny stood there for a few more minutes, just breathing in the night air. Tomorrow she'd have to figure out how all of this would actually work. She'd have to practice, prepare for the audition, meet with the foundation, make 1,000 decisions about her future. But tonight, she just let herself feel it. The joy, the hope, the possibility. She looked back at the restaurant one more time, at the window where she could just barely see the piano sitting in its corner. No longer silent, no longer just decoration. Finally awake. Finally alive. Finally exactly what it was always meant to be. Just like her. Jenny smiled, wiped the last tears from her eyes, and walked toward the bus stop. Tomorrow was coming, and for the first time in 3 years, she couldn't wait to see what it would bring. The night had started as someone else's celebration. But somehow, in the most unexpected way, it had become hers too. A night that reminded her that dreams don't really die. They just sleep sometimes, waiting for the right moment to wake up and sing again.